Welcome back, everyone. We're about to start the second half of the panel on daily life in Dunhuang. If you can please take your seats quickly, thank you. So we're going to continue on with the panel with our third speaker, Cuilan Liu, who is assistant professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. And today her topic is a Buddhist slave trade on the Silk Road, ? So please welcome Professor Liu.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, just test, okay. I'm really excited and I want to echo my colleagues in thanking Melody and Kitty and their wonderful team for putting this together. So I'm a scholar of Buddhism and law. I'm interested in crimes and criminals in Buddhism. So my own research has benefited tremendously from the manuscripts in the Dunhuang collection. So I'm truly excited here today to talk about something that has intrigued me for a long time, and also wanted to share you my work on the Buddhists and their involvement in slave trade on the Silk Road. So why slavery? The selling and buying of human beings as slaves were highly sensitive, controversial, and profitable businesses on the trading networks along the Silk Road. People of various ethnic origins, Chinese, Tibetan, Sogdian, Turkish, Mongolians, and etc., they became tradable commodities in markets along the Silk Road. And they were either captives of war, victims of abduction, or free children and adults sold as slaves by their parents or family members. So in theory, for the Buddhists in Dunhuang, they were supposedly bound by two legal systems. And the first one is the Buddhist monastic legal system, and the second one is the Tang legal system. But if we look at manuscripts excavated from Cave 17 at Dunhuang, and also from the many tombs, the Astana tombs in Turfan, then what we will be able to see is something that's really interesting, because from those documents, we see how Buddhist institutions and individual monks and nuns, they were involved in the slave trade as buyers, sellers, owners, and sometimes they serve as witnesses to a slave trade transaction. So in my talk today, I would like to give you a very brief introduction and analysis of 4 legal cases that I find from these 2 locations. And what I'm trying to do is, by the end of the talk, I hope to show you a number of things. Number 1, I wanted to show you how, despite of disapproval of slave ownership in Buddhist monastic law, and also the in presence of the very strict legal regulation on slave trade in the Chinese law from the Tang Dynasty, Buddhist monks and nuns showed a very little concern over these restrictions when they were trying to participate in the trading of slaves in the local markets in Dunhuang and Turfan. And the second thing that I wanted to show you is that whenever possible, whenever these monks and nuns, they were challenged for their possession of slaves, they were not reluctant at all in going to the local court to sue against whoever is trying to take the slaves away from them. So in these practices, these monks and nuns, they oftentimes they received evident support from the lay legal system. For example, in one occasion, in one of the cases that I'm going to show you today, the local government ruled in favor of a Buddhist nun to protect her rights as the adoptive mother while ignoring her potential violation of the Tang law by making a free commoner's daughter a slave. So you will hear more about that. And the choices for focusing on these, legal documents from these regions are, I guess, for those of us who are gathered here, very clear. So first of all, I wanted to focus on these cases in Dunhuang, Turfan, and the surrounding regions because, these regions, they were both really important hubs on the trading networks along the Silk Road. And both regions, Dunhuang and Turfan, were first under Han Chinese control before falling under Tibetan domination. And the second the second reason for my decision to focus in this region is primarily because, to a large extent, many of the primary sources that we found in this area are so much more exciting because compared with the carefully composed, censored, and edited official history, or the oftentimes exaggerated case stories in personal writings, raw records of legal disputes over land property, slaveries, and injury in daily life along the Silk Road, especially in Dunhuang and Turfan, they are so much more helpful for us to understand the legal aspects of ordained Buddhist monks and nuns, in this region along the Silk Road. So what is the legal context for anyone who is interested in buying, selling, or dealing with slaves? From the 7th to the 10th century, ordained Buddhist monks and nuns in China, in particular in this region, they were supposed to be bound by two sets of laws, the Buddhist monastic law and also the Tang Chinese law. In this dual legal context, we would imagine that monks and nuns should have nothing to do with slave or slave trades. But this is not the case that you are going to see in my presentation. The first set of restriction comes from the Buddhist monastic law. The Buddhist monastic law, they do accept Buddhist institutions, monasteries and nunneries, to accept donations of indentured servants, so they can keep servants, but they are absolutely prohibited from keeping or selling any slaves. For example, if we look at the Buddhist monastic law, for example, in this, this is one version of the Buddhist monastic law, from the Dhammagupta tradition, has a Chinese translation. So here we find a rule that says monks should not keep slaves, elephants, horses, chariots, chickens, dogs, pigs, sheep, land, houses, and gardens, and etc. So we have, I know you may have lots of questions, right? Why do you put human beings along with the elephants and chicken and dogs? We can talk about that on a different circumstance. And the second relevant rule that we have found is, in this Chinese translation of a list of rules, precepts for ordained novice monks. And here it clearly says, for the precepts for the novice monks, for as long as they live, they should not sell servants or slaves. So these are the regulations that we find in the Buddhist monastic context. And then if we move away to look at the second legal system that's also in operation in Dunhuang, we also find in the Tang legal system, for example, the Tang Code, this is what we have. Basically, this article says, if anybody is trying to sell a free commoner as a slave, this is a very serious crime and they can be severely punished. And other aspects of the Tang legal regulation that we can find in the Tang Code, they primarily talk about, I'm getting too excited, they primarily talk about the relationship between the slaves and their owners. For example, they say, as the slave, and they should always obey, respect, and do whatever their masters want them to do. And in return, the slave owners must also treat the slaves reasonably. Even if they had committed some crimes or violated some of the rules, they should not really kill them or punish them, too severely to damage their bodies. So these are the some of the regulations in the second legal system in the Tang Code. And furthermore, in Tang China, the government was also really interested in monitoring the financial transaction of slaves. For example, it is required by the law when a seller and a buyer has agreed on the terms of a sale of a slave, the buyer, they must sign a contract and also exchange goods and payment. And following this transaction, the seller and the buyer, they must draw up a market certificate. So this is known in Chinese as shiquan, in the local government office within 3 days of the transaction. And if they fail to do that, according to Article 422 in the Tang Code, if the seller and the buyer failed to secure that market certificate, the buyer will be punished by 30 blows with the light stick, 吃 in Chinese, and the seller will receive 20 blows with the light stick. At the same time, the government official who is responsible for processing the request for the market certificate, if they fail to do the job, they could also get punished. For example, for the first day of delay, the government official will be punished with 30 blows with a light stick, increased by 1 degree for each additional day, up to 100 blows with the heavy stick. So why do they do this? So my interpretation is this. I believe the introduction of this system does 3 things. Number 1, it allows the local government to collect tax on the slave transaction. And number 2, it also helps to double check to make sure that the sold human being is not a free commoner, but their status as a slave can be verified. And also number 3, this system also provides a good service to both the seller and also the buyer. If there's any problem, any disputes arises over the transaction of the slave, they have a written legal document to prove that the transaction was done appropriately. So now I wanted to move on to 4 exciting legal cases. I'm always interested in criminals and criminal cases and lawsuits. I didn't become a lawyer as my parents had wished, but I have a career here. So once ordained monks and nuns became slave owners, it looks like, according to the cases that you will see here, they're willing to do anything to keep them. And assistance from the lay legal system has been, I believe, one really important, legal system, legal support that they were given, and to support them in dealing with slaves in the trading network. For example, in the year 425, a Buddhist monk in Turfan offered a monetary reward to anyone who could help recapture his runaway slave. And disputes concerning the ownership of slaves were also a common cause for initiating lawsuits in the local court. And it is also apparent that Buddhist monks and nuns not only litigated over slave ownership against fellow monks and nuns, but they also, started lawsuits against other Buddhist institutions. So the first case that I wanted to show you concerns a Buddhist monk who had purchased a female slave, but in that sales contract, you will see very abusive terms. So this happened in 639, in the beginning, first part of the 7th century. A Buddhist monk in Gaochang, highlighted over there, purchased a female Turkestan slave in the public market. The market certificate for this sale is where you will see these very abusive terms. So let me show you. And this market certificate was found in the Astana tomb 135. So according to this market certificate, in the year of peak in 639, on the 27th day in the 5th month, a Buddhist monk, Yangxian, bought a Turkestan female slave, Upach, in the public market in Gaochang for 120 very pure Sasanian silver coins minted in Persia. And the buyer, monk Yangxian, was the son of a man whose name was Wuta from the Chan family in Gaochang, and the seller was the son of a man originated from Samarkand. What is most striking in this Sogdian language document is a list of abusive terms on how the owner, the Buddhist monk, can ill-treat this female slave. This may make you angry, but this is what was written there. Accordingly, the Buddhist monk Yangxian himself and his sons, grandsons, family, and descendants may at will hit her, abuse her, bind her, sell her off, pledge her, give and offer her as a gift, and do whatever they wanted to do with her. Suspension, yes. How do we make sense of this? He's a Buddhist, right? Why would he, he can do this privately, but why would he want to read this into a legal contract? How do we make sense of this? Abusive terms such as this, I did not find parallels of these abusive terms in any of the other sales contracts for the purchase and sale of slaves in the Dunhuang area. But what I was able to find is, so what I was able to find is that the only known slave sale contracts with very similar abusive terms are identified by Yoshida and his colleagues in 3 Prakrit language contracts written in the Karoshli script on wooden tablets that Ohel Stang had discovered from Nia in the Tarim Basin, dated between 235 and 325 CE. So two of these documents from Nia for the sale of female slaves, and one was for the sale of a male slave. And when we compare these two documents, you can immediately see they are identical. So not in Dunhuang, not in Turfan, but from Nia, you see another example of very abusive terms contained in this. And the second case that I wanted to talk about concerns, it's a lawsuit concerning the ownership of a few female slaves, and this is between one Buddhist nun and two Buddhist monks against a Buddhist institution. So according to Paleo-Tibetan 1079, in the early 9th century, two monks and nuns, they litigated against an unspecified Buddhist monastery over the ownership of several slaves. So what happened? What were they doing? So according to this document, sometime after the Tibetans took over Dunhuang in 786, there was a Buddhist monk whose name was Gang Kim Gim. He owned a female slave. This woman gave birth to 3 daughters. According to the statement provided by one of the nuns who was suing the monastery, her brother, gave 2 of the daughters to a Buddhist monastery, and he gave the 3rd daughter to her as his younger sister. But later on, this sister was supported by 2 other monks. So these 3 Buddhists decided to launch a lawsuit over the monastery, stating that the nun owns all the 4 women instead of just getting 1. The outcome of the lawsuit, so eventually in this case, the judges in the local court in Dunhuang decided to rule in favor of the nun, saying that she is the rightful owner. She and also the 2 monks, they own all the slaves in dispute. And the third case that I wanted to talk about is a Chinese language document from Dunhuang. And in this case, it's a lawsuit between 2 Buddhist monks. Okay, so here, what we have is, in this Chinese language document S528, we have, what happened is this. There's one Buddhist monk whose name was Zhide. So he and his parents were living and working as personal retainers for a Buddhist monk official. Like in Chinese, his title is Sengzhen, the Sangha regulator. So what happened was, this Buddhist monk, we don't know when he became a monk, but he married one of his cousins. And with his cousin, they gave birth to 2 children. But we don't know when he became a monk, okay? You have 1,000 questions in your head. Why do monks have wives and children? We can talk about that later on. But what happened was this. This monk, again, another surprising point. This monk later in his life was enlisted to serve as a soldier at a military post away from Dunhuang, and he didn't have money to buy food to travel there. And because of that, he decided to submit a lawsuit and trying to reclaim some of the slaves. So unfortunately, he was fighting against another Buddhist monk. Oh, sorry. Okay, he was trying to fight over the ownership against another Buddhist monk. Unfortunately, in this case, we don't know the outcome. We don't know, the eventual judicial, judgment. Who is the real owner of the slaves in dispute? So unfortunately, we don't know the outcome. The fourth one that I wanted to show you is, again, a document written in, this is a Tibetan document, and this one is a lawsuit concerning a dispute between a Buddhist nun and a woman as her adoptive daughter in the lay court at a time when Dunhuang was under the Gui Yijun control. So this dispute is recorded in the Tibetan language manuscript, Paleo-Tibetan 1080. And the manuscript begins with the nun's statement in which she described how she had adopted this, the daughter in question over 20 years ago. And this is followed by the testimony from the nun and concludes with a judicial decision at the very end. So the final judgment on this document is not authenticated by the Vermilion seal that you would often see on many of the other legal documents from Dunhuang, but this document does have some kind of official approval because, for example, like those two Chinese characters that I highlighted in red, means approval. So this is a legal document that has been authorized by the local judicial officials. So what happened in this text was that this nun, when he submitted the sorry. When I wanted to go back to you. So this nun, in this lawsuit, she said, about 20 years ago, a man who had just lost his wife came to her house holding a baby in his arm and begged her to adopt the baby girl as, in her house. So, and he also said, if you don't adopt her, she may die tomorrow or the day after. And in particular, the man continued to beg the nun and promised this. If you adopt her, you can either treat her as your daughter in Tibetan Pumo, or you can use her as a slave girl, and this is in Tibetan written as Chanmo, and it's completely up to you. So finally, the woman said, the nun said, okay, I adopted her out of compassion. But then 20 years later, she took the girl to the court and saying that she has been, serving me well in the past 20 years, but now she has become more and more rebellious, and she tried to reconnect with her biological family. She claimed a woman to be her mother, and she claimed another man to be her paternal uncle. She's trying to run away from me. So that's why she brought her to the court. So in this document, the nun requested an official confirmation of her ownership of the girl, accused the girl of attempting to abandon her adoptive mother, which is a crime in the Tang legal system, and also demanded a court order to prohibit the girl from connecting with her biological family. So in the petition itself, the nun or the legal professional who was, who had written the document for her, and also the judges, they referred to a Tang article about adoption. So if I'm not mistaken, so these references are likely referring to Article 157 in the Tang Code. So basically, in this article, it basically says whenever a child, oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. When a child is, when a child has been adopted as a son or daughter, they must continue. They have a permanent responsibility to take care of their adopted parents. So in this case, the daughter eventually was ruled that she, the judge approved all of the requests from the Buddhist nun. I'm almost done. So here, in this case, many scholars before me had tried to read this case of the nun and celebrating the nun's victory in this lawsuit. But here, when I was working on this text, I saw it from a totally different light. So instead of celebrating this nun's victory in this lawsuit, I think she was potentially had violated this very serious Tang legal code that I presented earlier, because she was treating a free commoner as a slave. So my conclusion. So what are some of my conclusions? I'm going to make this as simple as possible. So I am so sorry. The message is very simple. I'm trying to make 2 points. Number one, I wanted to prove, and I hope I have, that monks and nuns, they have 2 legal systems that they're supposed to obey. They didn't care about them at all, okay? They totally ignored. They not only owned slaves, but they also participated in the trade, right? And when people were trying to take those slaves away from them, they were not afraid to go to the court, okay, to fight over their rights. Message number 2, I think these monks and nuns were emboldened by the legal support that they were able to receive from the local judges, who oftentimes ruled in their favor. Last thing, okay, if you are made more intrigued about slaves, there's a real document that you can see from the Oasis in Dunhuang exhibition, because one of the manuscript, S2-2199, is actually a will left by a Buddhist nun whose name was Lin Hui. She was dying, and in this document, you will see that she mentioned she has a domestic slave that she was going to give to her niece. So I will end my presentation on that note. Again, thank you so much for your patience.